Despite having a paltry library compared to the Sony PlayStation, fans of the Nintendo 64 always said it was quality over quantity, and hey, the Nintendo 64 has some bangers. Mario 64, Goldeneye, Banjo-Kazooie, Ocarina of Time, and Majora's Mask. But as Nintendo 64 continues to age, the new generation of gamers really don't see it as this magical device that those who grew up with it do. And when you look at the prices of Nintendo 64 games compared to the PlayStation or Sega Saturn, for example, it seems that the popularity of Nintendo 64 is waning. Welcome to Retronomics, the series that follows price trends in video games, and today we're talking about the Nintendo 64, a true 64-bit console, not that fake 64-bit Jaguar. A system designed from the ground up for 3D gaming, the first console to include an analog stick, the first console to include rumble, and the last home console to use cartridges for the next 20 years. Now, you would think that given the age and popularity of the Nintendo 64 that game prices would be outrageous, especially given the past 2 years, but nope. The Nintendo 64 still has great affordable games for purchase 26 years later, assuming that you don't mind loose copies. That's the prices I'm tracking in this video. Complete in-box copies just don't sell enough to get a good track on the trends, and spoiler alert, they're significantly more expensive than the loose copies. I took suggestions from my subscribers and I have 26 games to forecast. If you want to suggest some games in the future, make sure you're subscribed so you know when I ask my audience. All of my prices come from PriceCharting.com, and I take a look at eBay sold listings and availability to determine if the prices will go up, down, or stay the same. So let's take a look at some Nintendo 64 prices. ClayFighter Sculptor's Cut has always been expensive. This was originally a Blockbuster rental exclusive and sold only after Blockbuster wanted to clear out the stock for the next generation. The main difference between this and 63 1/3 is that there are 4 characters that were cut from the original game. Otherwise, the gameplay stays the same. The price will remain the same unless it ever gets a port or a reproduction. So good luck finding this in the wild, and I really hope that it's an authentic version. Harvest Moon 64 is a cute little farm simulation game from Natsume and has a cult following. Stardew Valley draws a lot of inspiration from this game, so if you're a fan of that game and you haven't played Harvest Moon, it's worth going back to. There are new additions to the series on modern platforms, and as such, the Nintendo 64 version has seen a bit of a jump, but it's still relatively inexpensive. If you don't mind the condition of the label, there are plenty on eBay for less than Price Charting's price, but again, it has some faded labels. Conker's Bad Fur Day is a Nintendo 64 icon, a total role reversal for Conker, who used to be this plucky little squirrel. It's so much of a role reversal that Nintendo went out of their way to make sure people knew it wasn't for kids. The game is a 3D platformer, which the Nintendo 64 is known for, so the price is going to be influenced by that and the notoriety. So I suggest if you find it for a price that you're comfortable with, pull the trigger ASAP, because even though this is on the rare replay, it's still pricey. Paper Mario and Paper Mario Thousand Year Door are the only Paper Mario games that matter, right fellas? Paper Mario for the Nintendo 64 was originally supposed to be Super Mario RPG 2, but Nintendo took it in another direction, and a lot of people agree that it's a fantastic game. The price spiked at the start of the pandemic and never looked back, but the good news is that it is on Nintendo Switch Online service, so the price won't run away anytime soon. It's still pricey, but there are plenty of copies on eBay, so I'd keep an eye out for a deal. You didn't think that I'd make a Retronomics episode without mentioning an Atlas title, did you? Snowboard Kids is a cartoony racing game, but instead of karts and jet skis, we got snowboards. As far as Atlas games go, this is fairly inexpensive, ranging between $40 and $50 for the past 2 years. I would make it a priority and pick this up in the near future because it probably won't be re-released anytime soon, and you never know when it'll spike in popularity. Goemon's Great Adventure is the sequel to Mystical Ninja and is a 2.5D platform adventure. This game has plummeted in value since its peak in March of 2022, assuming that you can find it for its current price. Available eBay copies are still well over $100, so maybe wait to see if some comes out for lower, but judging by the conditions of the previously sold ones, it might be worth the extra cost. The Nintendo 64 is known for 4-player party action, and Bomberman Second Attack is a great addition to the collection, assuming that you have deep pockets. There are cheaper Bomberman games out there, but Second Attack is the one that everybody praises on the Nintendo 64, so that combined with it being a lesser selling sequel, it's going to be expensive from here on out. The good news is that it has more or less settled down so you can save up without it spiking dramatically in value for now. Mischief Makers is a 2.5D platform adventure, so it didn't really get much love when it was first released since full 3D platformers were all the rage. This game I would consider getting now as more and more people are starting to realize that maybe 2.5D platform games on early 3D systems weren't all that bad. Resident Evil 2 is available on multiple platforms, but it is a marvel of engineering to get to fit on a Nintendo 64 cartridge with minimal compromises. The remake of this game caused the value of the originals to spike, and the price hasn't gone down since then. I would expect this to remain high from here on out. It's a popular franchise, and now that's how prices are influenced. Keep an eye out for a cheap copy if you haven't found one yet. Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards is another 2.5D game, and it's Kirby, so you know what you're getting into. Not really much to say about this game otherwise, but the good news is that it's relatively inexpensive compared to other games on this list. You can't go wrong if you pick it up now. Donkey Kong 64 is a collectathon game to end all collectathons. It's one game that requires the Nintendo 64 expansion pack, so make sure that you have one before picking this one up. A lot of people will argue that this game hasn't really aged well, and I would say that it wasn't really great to begin with. I was excited about having it, but to change different Kongs to access different areas, it was pretty tiresome. The game is a great price currently, so if you're looking to experience what a 3D Donkey Kong game was, then there you go. In my Castlevania video, I mentioned that the 3D Castlevanias were starting to gain traction, and Castlevania for the Nintendo 64 is one that has been panned for years but now is starting to see a resurgence. But it could also be collectors just scooping up all games from popular franchises. This game is pretty inexpensive, and if you want to subject yourself to early 3D adventures, now's your chance. I don't think it'll increase substantially in the next year or so. South Park 64 is a first-person shooter based on a popular TV show. This was still a time where licensed games loosely fit their source material. As far as first-person shooters go, it's no Goldeneye, but if you're a fan of South Park, it's fun to go back to from time to time. It's pretty inexpensive as it sold a ton, but it's slowly climbing in value. Will it break $30 in the next year? Perhaps, but it's far from a hidden gem. It's just a gem. Buy it now or wait. I don't usually do collector's editions, but Ocarina of Time Collector's Edition is just a gold cartridge, and is it really a Zelda game if it isn't in a gold cartridge? I know Link to the Past isn't gold, but that's beside the point. This is the 3D debut of Zelda, and it's fantastic as far as Nintendo 64 games go, and 3D games in general. The gold cartridge does go for a premium as it does contain the original version of the game with blood and those weird religious chants in the fire temple. If you somehow haven't gotten Ocarina of Time, this game can only increase in value, especially since the gold plastic is more brittle and the labels have a habit of fading. Is it a sports game if you want to add it to your collection? Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 would fall into that category, beloved by many because of its great gameplay and banging soundtrack. It's available on other platforms, and of course the Nintendo tax makes it more expensive. If you don't want to spend the $20 on just one cart, you can get the bundle of 1 and 2 on modern consoles. But hey, this is Retronomics. If you want a real deal, pick this one up and you won't be disappointed with the price. Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine is another Blockbuster exclusive. This is an original Indiana Jones adventure made by Factor 5, who are behind the Nintendo 64 Lucasfilm games. So if you like those and you like Indiana Jones, this might be the one to get. Because it was exclusive, it's expensive, but not as rare as Sculptor's Cut. So if you're after a full set of Nintendo 64 games, I suggest making this one a priority, because while the price is trending down, it probably won't drop in the future. It's an obscure game, but not as popular as Sculptor's Cut, so it could still be prone to spikes in the future, especially when the next Indiana Jones movie comes out. I joke, but stranger things have happened. Super Mario 3D All-Stars nuked Mario Sunshine's price, but Super Mario 64's price was already on a downward trend before that collection was announced. It's one of the best-selling games for the platform, and anyone who owned a Nintendo 64 when it was new bought Mario 64 because it was only one of 2 launch titles. Fantastic game for the price, and I would buy it now if you somehow didn't immediately buy this when you got a Nintendo 64. Star Fox 64 is a great example of the Rumble Pack addition to the Nintendo 64, so much so that it was included with the game. Star Fox 64 is another top-selling game, so you can find this one on the cheap. Just make sure that you have a Rumble Pack available so you can experience a true barrel roll. The price isn't really going to spike wildly in the future, considering it is on the Switch Online service. Quest 64 is one of the very few RPG titles on the platform. The PlayStation really had a stranglehold on the market. Not really a lot that you could do with cartridges at the time. And this is one that I would keep an eye out and maybe buy now, because while it's not as popular as Final Fantasy, it being one of the lone RPGs for the Nintendo 64 could cause it to rise in value as time goes on and people take a liking to it. Worms Armageddon is a late-in-life Nintendo 64 title, and not really a game that you would think would be on the Nintendo 64. It's one that I wasn't really aware of because I played it on the PC, and it's a lot of fun, but I don't think it's $300 fun. And even with the limited run reprint, the price of this game isn't expected to drop anytime soon. As welcome as reprints are, they really don't faze collectors looking for the quote-unquote authentic copies, especially those that are so expensive that you're buying them to flex on people. So it's up to you. Limited Run hasn't shipped these yet despite selling them in December of last year, so maybe it'll be less than the real thing when it comes out. I know I'm including a lot of rare titles, but the Nintendo 64 was the golden age of rare. Banjo-Kazooie is a classic collectathon game, and it's pretty fun. The concept of 2 characters working together seamlessly along with great humor and great gameplay make for a classic game. And it's inexpensive. It's available on the Rare Replay and Nintendo Switch Online, so the price will remain relatively obtainable. I would consider picking this one up now since it's a great game and I only see it climbing in value, or at the very least holding steady. Goldeneye is a Nintendo 64 staple, and I'd have to turn in my gamer card if I didn't mention it here. This is one game that popularized first-person shooters on the console. While there have been ports of Wolfenstein, Quake, and Doom, Goldeneye was original to the Nintendo 64, and with 4-player action, it was a surefire hit. While a lot of people will tell you that Goldeneye hasn't aged well over the years, it's still a must-have for the Nintendo 64, and its price isn't likely to dramatically fluctuate from here on out. Speaking of party games, Mario Party 2 is one game that I would recommend adding. There are 3 Mario Party games, and most people feel that Mario Party 2 is the best of all Mario Party games out there. It is a bit more expensive than the rest of the popular Nintendo 64 games on this list, but it's still affordable. Given how many copies are out there, it's unlikely that we'll see a super spike in the price, especially since Super Mario Party contains most of the minigames that were featured in Mario game parties in the past. F-Zero X is one of the only Nintendo 64 games on this list that has spiked this year, but it is trending a bit back down. F-Zero X is pretty impressive for the Nintendo 64, but it's overshadowed by F-Zero GX. I think the F-Zero games will hold their value for the foreseeable future. This one is available on Nintendo Switch Online, so it might not spike wildly in the future, but I would suggest keeping an eye out for a good price and snagging it now. I know I already mentioned an Atlas game, but that wasn't an RPG. Ogre Battle 64 is an Atlas RPG, and surprise, it's expensive. It wasn't always expensive, but 2020 happened, and over the past 2 years, it's tripled in value. It'll probably stabilize a little bit in the next 6 months, but I don't think that we'll see a substantial drop. I would consider keeping an eye out on this, because if you find one for under $100, you won't see it again if you don't pull the trigger. Turok 3 Shadows of Oblivion is the final Turok game on the Nintendo 64, and these games are fun. Just goofy things happen in this series. Another old first-person shooter that shows its age with the lack of dual analog sticks, but once you reacclimate to the controls, it's smooth sailing. This is the most expensive Turok game by far, but the price seems to be settling down after a weird spike of a $430 open bid sale. It does look that this was a troll bid because the seller relisted it and it sold for a more reasonable $40. So ignore price charting on this one and just look for a good price on eBay. So there you have it, 26 Nintendo 64 game prices tracked. And as you can see, while there are heavy hitters, if you want to just enjoy the classic games, you can build a decent collection without breaking the bank. The obscenely priced games were legitimately rare to begin with, not just games that people decided were expensive now. It also helps that loose copies aren't that desirable by those who influence the prices now. Complete in-box games for any system are expensive, but those that use cardboard for their boxes are unreasonably expensive. I personally don't even collect CIB for those systems. The carts hold up pretty well too, but the labels are a different story. Nintendo really cheaped out during this era. You can tell how often a game was played based on the fading in the middle of the label from taking the cartridge out of the console. I do think that we'll see Nintendo 64 loose prices be pretty stable from here on out. Complete prices are a different story, and if you're one of those collectors, then good luck. Just be careful when you are collecting Nintendo 64 games of reproductions out of China. They're pretty easy to spot online because most ship from China, but locally there are some less than ethical stores who would rather keep an inventory of games rather than ensure that they're legit. But let me know what you think about the Nintendo 64. Has it aged gracefully, or is it clouded with nostalgia? If you like this video, give it a like and consider subscribing for future content. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at snicktendo. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Super Nicktendo, and I'll see you next time.